Rob here at Etrailer.com, and today you're going to be taking a look at the Timbren rear suspension enhancement on our 2016 Honda Odyssey. Now, rear suspension enhancements are going to come into play whenever you have a lot of cargo in the back or you're towing a trailer that's going to make the back end sag. Once you put all that weight in the back, it does cause the back end to push down. As you can see in the back here at the wheel well, it's actually getting really close to the tire, which means we're not going to have a lot of travel for our suspension, giving us a really rough ride, and it's putting a lot of strain back here. But if we move to the front, we can see that it's actually pulling the front up, causing that teetering effect. Now what that's going to do is that's going to wear down our tires unevenly because our tires are going to get out of alignment. Not to mention our headlights are going to be pointing up, so potentially blinding people when we're driving down the road. And our braking is going to be diminished because we don't have as much pressure on our contact on the front tires. Now all those things can happen whether you're pulling a trailer, you have a lot of gear in the back, or any reason that you have a lot of cargo or weight at the back of your vehicle. It's going to take a lot of that strain and stress. Not to mention, once we add passengers, that's even more weight back there. So before we put our Timbrens in place, let's take our Odyssey out on our test course and see how it handles. Now that the Timbrens are in place, you can see that the back end's still squatting down quite a bit, but not as much. If we move up front, we can see that it's closer to the factory spot where it's not coming up as high, but let's take our van back out on the test course and see how they handle. So here's what our Timbrens are going to look like once we have them installed. These are actually going to live on the inside of our coil springs, and they're going to replace our factory joust stop. Now the reason why they're going to give us so much support is whenever we have a lot of weight in our van, the spring is going to compress. And you can see that there's a gap right here between our Timbren and the bottom of the control arm here. Once that gap starts to close, or once the Timbren makes contact, it's going to provide that support, and the more weight we put on it, the stiffer it's going to become. And we're going to have one Timbren on each side of the axle on the rear. That way they work independently from each other, so if we're taking a sharp turn or an evasive maneuver where the car wants to lean really bad, these are going to help out with that body roll. Not to mention they're going to help out if we have an off-center load and help try to keep our Odyssey nice and level. And since our Timbrens are made out of rubber, they're going to absorb a lot of the road shocks and bumps as we're driving down the road, whether we're unloaded or loaded. Our Timbrens are going to be rated at 2,000 pounds of load leveling support. Just keep in mind, these aren't going to increase the payload of your Odyssey. They're just there to help support that extra weight you may have loaded up and give us a smooth ride. So you do want to double check your owner's manual and never exceed the manufacturer's recommended weight. One of the best things about our Timbrens is the fact that they're maintenance free. Once they're in, we can completely forget about them. Unlike some of the other upgrades like airbags, which is going to require us to check and monitor the air pressure frequently. Plus, the install is going to be a lot more in-depth than the Timbrens are. We're going to have to run lines and everything else. But our Timbrens, it's a pretty straightforward installation. We are going to have to remove the spring, and some customers may feel a little bit uneasy, but we'll give you a few tips and tricks of how to get everything in safely and easily. But now that we've seen what they look like, let's put one side on together. To begin your installation, you want to park your Odyssey on a nice level surface, and we're going to want to lift it by the frame. We only really need to get it up high enough so that we have room to work, but you want to lift it by the frame so that the suspension can hang down, and then we're going to remove our tire. Now with your suspension hanging down and the wheel removed, we want to come to the lower control arm in the back here, and I'm going to place a jack stand right underneath there, just providing a little bit of tension. And if you're doing it on the ground, you want to put jack stands underneath the frame and use a floor jack, again, just to provide just a little bit of tension on the lower part of the arm here. We don't want to lift it, we just want to put a little bit of pressure upward. Now right where our lower control arm meets the knuckle here, we're going to have a bolt. We want to pull that bolt out so that the lower control arm can swing out of the way. So we'll grab a 17mm socket and pull it out. Now we want to hold on to this bolt because we are going to be reusing it. Now you want to slowly lower the jack to allow the control arm to come down so we have a little bit more room and we can get the spring to come out. Now you do want to do it a little slow because there is a lot of tension there. Once we have the jack low enough, we can move it out of the way. I'm just going to push down on the lower control arm. Make sure you grab the spring. You just want to move the control arm out of the way enough so that you can grab the spring and pull it completely out. Make sure you hold on to the top and bottom plastic pieces and the spring, because these are going to go back in. Now inside the spring we'll have our factory jounce stop. We need to remove that, so you want to grab an extension and a 14mm socket. Again, just kind of pull the lower control arm out of the way. We'll put our socket inside the jounce stop, and then we can unthread the bolt and pull it out. Bolt remove, we'll pull the jounce stop out and the bolt, and we can get rid of these because our Timberlands are going to be replacing both of these. So we can grab our Aeon spring out of the kit. We're going to grab one of the plate washers that go right over the top. It's going to line up with a smaller hole that has that metal piece. You kind of want to hold it there with your hand. We'll flip it over. There's going to be a larger hole, and you can see that it goes all the way through. We're going to grab the bolt from our kit, and it'll help if you grab an extension and an 8mm Allen socket. And we're going to pass the bolt through. Make sure it goes all the way through the spring and comes out the top of that washer. Now we're going to take it and we're just going to thread it into the factory location where we pull our jounce stop out. I'm going to get it started by hand just to make sure it's not going to fall. Then I'll come back with a ratchet and fully tighten it. Now with the Timbren installed, we can replace our spring. So again, we're going to pull down on that lower control arm. You want to get the top in first. Make sure that everything's lined up properly. And since there's so much tension on the spring, it's not going to sit normally when you put it back. It is going to be a little bit off like it is now, but that's okay. Because we're going to grab our jack again. We're going to get it underneath the lower control arm. And we're going to use the jack to raise it up so it'll line up with our knuckle here. And once you have everything lined up, we're going to take the factory bolt, reinsert it, make sure it's starting to thread, and then we can tighten it up all the way. Once all your hardware is tightened up, we can slowly let our support down. And the passenger side is going to be exactly the same way, so we're going to go ahead and get our tire put on and then do that side. Now after we drove on our test course with the Timberlands, it did improve, but not as much as I was hoping for. So another suspension upgrade option would be airbags. Now again, the airbags are going to be a little bit more in depth with the installation, but in my opinion they are going to give you more benefit and solve the problem of the back end sagging down so much. But with all that being said, again, I'm Rob here at Etrailer.com, and that'll finish up your look at the Timbren rear suspension enhancement system on our 2016 Honda Odyssey.